I'll never forget the first time I led Rosh HaShanah services. I was serving a student pulpit with about 30 families south of Detroit. I remember my father had lent me a white robe for the occasion. I had never worn one before, and I somehow managed to change a diaper on the hood of my car without getting anything on it. The first thing that the president of the congregation said when I stepped into the room was, "What's with the robe?" I spent the first half of the service trying to remember where exactly I had placed my sermon. I recalled just in the nick of time. So during the silent prayer, I mindfully made my way down the aisle to the back of the room where I had left my sermon on top of the coat rack, and I retrieved it and brought it back, and I was good to go until I got to the last page of my sermon when I realized I must have run out of paper in the printer. But fortunately, I had it memorized, and I knew pretty much what I was going to say. I don't think anyone noticed too much. The point is, trying new things can be difficult. We have to step outside the familiar and the comfortable toward the potential. It can be a risk, but where would we be without ever taking a risk? Seriously, if nobody ever took risks in life, there'd be no love in this world. Rosh HaShanah is a time for new beginnings. It's the head of the year. We've taken a bit of a risk this year trying a new high holiday machzor. After 30 years with Gates of Repentance, there's a part of this process that feels a bit like bidding an old friend farewell for the last time. There are certain readings we've come to expect to hear, and they're not with us this year. There were certain reflections during the Yizkor service that always reminded us of parents, spouses, or friends lost. If you're nostalgic for Gates of Repentance, I'll tell you what, feel free to take a copy home with you. We have several copies. It's actually a very good book, and I especially like the meditations before each service. So if it ain't broke, why fix it? Did you ever notice that the moment that something's gone, we remember it better than it actually was? The rabbis say, achrei mot kiddushin. Well, fond as we may be of Gates of Repentance, there was room for a few improvements. For one thing, Gates of Repentance didn't have transliterations next to the Hebrew on the same page. How many people actually know the Hebrew well enough to follow along without transliteration? You don't have to raise your hands. It was embarrassing for people to have to flip to the back for the few translations that resided in the back of the book, like the back of the bus. In the new Mishkan HaNefesh, we're all on the same page, literally, and nobody can tell which side of the page we're on. The second issue with Gates of Repentance was the use of the antiquated word Lord. Many of us may reflect fondly upon the good old days when we didn't have to be so politically correct when we spoke about God. The fact of the matter is that increasingly, gendered allusions to God are making it more difficult for people to connect with our traditions. If people can't connect with our traditions, then there's no future for our heritage. Some time ago, Rabbi Koch simply began replacing the word Lord with Adonai. Mishkan Tefillah, Mishkan HaNefesh, has followed his wise example, translating each blessing from Baruch Atah Adonai to Blessed are you Adonai, and restructuring the rest of the translations with non-gender specific English honorifics. A naysayer might argue that retaining the words like Avinu Malkeinu in the Hebrew, rather than simply saying our Father, our King, clouds the fact that Hebrew is a gendered language, and God was always understood to be masculine. However, the truth of the matter is that there was a lot more gender fluidity in the original Hebrew than there is in the modern English, especially when it comes to God. Whoever said that God was a man anyway? If God is everywhere, then God can't be contained in a physical body. And if God has no body, then assigning God a gender is like creating God in the image of man. Several of the biblical names for God are feminine, such as Shekhinah, God's feminine aspect, and Rachamim, which is technically masculine, but it comes from the Hebrew word for womb. By retaining the original Hebrew and avoiding gendered translations, Mishkan HaNefesh simultaneously keeps us closer in keeping with our traditional language, while also keeping the meaning more accessible to the progressive members of our Jewish community. The Reform movement has always supported the equality of women along with men, and the time has come to let go of the gendered language of a male-dominated society. The third issue with Gates of Repentance is something I spoke about in a recent article in the Connecticut Jewish Ledger. As I said, some of the readings which seemed refreshing 30 years ago now come across a bit banal, or at least overworked. When the CCAR first came out with the Avodah service, which led us on Yom Kippur afternoon through the span of Jewish history, from creation, through the sacrificial period, through the martyrdoms of our rabbis, through the Holocaust, and back to the establishment of the State of Israel, this was originally considered a radically innovative approach to Yom Kippur, engaging people, connecting them with the comprehensive totality of Jewish history, setting this generation in place along a trajectory of an enduring mission. But when you read through it year after year after year after year, it's like, how many times can you watch the movie Exodus? Sooner or later, you hit your limit. The last time that I used the Avodah service in Gates of Repentance, I looked around the room and 1/3 of the room was asleep, 1/3 of the room was counting ceiling tiles, and the other third of the room was gossiping about the other 2/3 of the room. I swore that was the last time I was ever going to use that particular service. Although it may feel a bit like we're breaking with tradition by setting aside some of the prayers and language we've grown accustomed to, Judaism has always embraced change. From its inception, Judaism has been an evolving religion, transforming the worship of many gods into the worship of the one and only God. Adapting pagan sacrifices to temple sacrifices, transforming sacrifices into prayer and rebooting prayers to resonate better with the needs and concerns of each new generation. It may sound sacrilegious to advocate for amending or even improving upon the sacred traditional prayers, but the rabbis have argued for 2,000 years that prayer must in fact be a combination of keva and kavanah, routine and intentionality. For over 1,000 years before the first prayer book was composed by Rav Amram Gaon in the 9th century, prayers had always been in flux. They varied from congregation to congregation and sometimes service to service. Prayers have always been meant to be played with, reworked, revised, and I dare say improved. Through the process of wrestling with the prayers, we broaden our horizons. We reevaluate the purpose of the prayers, and we reconsider whom we are meant to be in relationship with the one to whom we are praying. The Reform movement labored 7 years to create a high holiday machzor to meet today's Reformed Jews where we are right now at this moment in history. Part of the goal was to speak to the breadth of the Jewish people, embracing the plurality of our perspectives and the diversity of our experiences. Not only are the traditional prayers translated in a more inclusive manner, but they are interwoven with contemporary works of poetry, commissioned to be spirited, inspiring, and uplifting. American Judaism isn't what it once was. We've come a long way, but we can no longer presume, as we did when Gates of Repentance first came out, that everyone's beliefs and theology are one and the same. Today, we're more in keeping with the maxim, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. That is why Mishkan HaNefesh was designed to be focused much more on a personalized spiritual exploration. We still pray as a community, But the new Machzor includes a variety of countertexts and alternative versions of the prayers. A concerted effort was made to affirm the presence of Jews who may be struggling with their faith, those who have suffered tragic loss, and those who may even be angry with God. Also, Mishkan Tefillah, or Mishkan HaNefesh, I should say, is deliberately inclusive, recognizing every complex Jewish community's differences among its constituents. When it comes to personal practices, religiosity, sexual orientation, and ever-changing perspectives as we come together as one congregation on the high holidays. As my colleague Rabbi Eric Polikoff recently observed, Mishkan HaNefesh has a strong sense of Jewish universalism, which the Reform movement has long championed. He notes the new translation of the Torah blessings. The translation in Gates of Repentance spoke of, quote, praising God who has chosen us from all peoples by giving us his Torah. Whereas the new translation praises God, quote, who has embraced us and gave us this teaching, having chosen us to embody Torah among the peoples of the earth. Do you see the difference between being chosen from all peoples and being chosen to embody Torah among the peoples of the earth? The newer translation may not be as literal, but its understanding of what it means to be chosen is actually more accurate. Judaism never understood being chosen as being superior. Nobody knows better than us that we are not superior to anyone, nor is anyone superior to us. The concept of being the chosen people was always about our responsibility to serve the world through Torah. As Rabbi Polikoff observes, I think this very much reflects a Reform understanding that what makes us Jewish is doing Torah, and what makes us distinct as Jews is that we have a mission to embody Torah. There was one other compelling reason for us to make the move from Gates of Repentance to Mishkan HaNefesh. Even though it was only completed 1.5 years ago, an increasing number of congregations across the country have chosen this path. In the next couple of years, everyone in the Reform movement is going to be using Mishkan HaNefesh. It was Hillel who said in Pirkei Avot 2:4, do not separate yourself from the community. If the broader Jewish community is headed in this direction of inclusive, pluralistic, liturgical innovation, we don't want to be stuck in the past just because it feels comfortable and predictable. As we frequently recite from our Shabbat prayer book, Mishkan Tefillah, wake us, O God, and shake us from the sweet and sad poignancies rendered by half-forgotten melodies and rubric prayers of yesteryears. Disturb us, O God, and vex us. Let not your Shabbat be a day of torpor and slumber. Let it be a time to be stirred and spurred to action. Judaism cannot be the opiate of the masses, lulling us into a trance, blindly following the familiar status quo. The purpose of prayer is to inspire us to action. If we don't permit our prayer to evolve, then a part of us fails to mature as a people. How can we ever reach our fullest potential, whether as individuals or as a community, if we are too fearful to embrace change, to broaden our horizons, to run the risk of disturbing our comfort zone for the aspiration of attaining our goals and accomplishing everything that is possible together? Therefore, may we let the gates of repentance go and welcome Mishkan HaNefesh into our souls in the spirit of an ever-evolving Judaism with a mission to adapt our key values and core traditions to every new generation, embracing the spirit of inclusion, empowering every element of our constituency, inspiring our people to play an active role in this ever-changing world. Ken Yehi Ratzon. Continue.